They don't care.
That's a scary thought, though.
It is.
Good evening. Welcome to the City of Green Council meeting. Today's Tuesday, April 23rd, 2019. Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mrs. Babbitt.
Here.
Mr. Dyer.
Here.
Mr. Humphrey.
Here.
Mr. Shaughnessy.
Here.
Mr. Spate.
Here.
Mr. Yergin.
Here.
Mr. Young.
Here. Okay, the next item on our agenda is the approval of the April 9th, 2019 regular meeting minutes.
Move to approve.
Second.
I have a motion and a second for the approval of the April 9th, 2019 regular meeting minutes. Is there any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. The next item is the approval of the March financial statement subject to audit.
Move to approve.
Second.
I have a motion and a second for the approval of the March financial statement subject to audit. Is there any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. The next item on our agenda is the public report. This is an opportunity for anyone here who would like to address council to do so. When I call your name, you're welcome to come up to the podium. Please try to keep your comments close to 3 minutes, and and we'll need your name and address for the record. Do we want to get to Deputy Brown first? The first person signed in this evening is Robert Talinda.
Evening, Robert Tlunda, 2740 Compass Point Drive, and part of the Lakes of Green development. It's what I wanted to talk about tonight. I wanted to ask the city, council, and the mayor, what is the process in the city of Green to go from an interest in developing a piece of land, all right, to residential housing, to turning control over the resultant development to the homeowner association? Does the city just let the developer do what they want? I'm sure the answer is no. In no particular order, I'm sure. Submitting approvals, engineering studies, zoning approvals, plat approval, city council approval, performance bonds, maintenance bonds, which are substantial dollars, in which essentially the city is covered. Now, what I'm asking is, what has the city done or required of the developer to ensure they do what they say they're going to do regarding turnover the HOA to the residents? All right, I don't see where this is any requirement for the city, and I think it should. All right, over the next 30 years, the residents, based on the number of residents that are in Lakes of Green, those residents over the next 30 years are going to contribute $16 million in taxes, all right, to the city of Green. And those are going to go for any number of things, whether it's streets, sewers, public services, police and fire services, contributes to the salaries and expenses of everybody that's sitting in this room right now. All right, I believe that the Lakes of Green should have some consideration to make sure our interests are considered and protected. I'm for an HOA, so it's not like I don't want an HOA. I'm not going to try to cause any disturbance there. I'm not asking the city council or the city to run the HOA after it's been turned over to the homeowners association and the residents. What I am asking is for some assistance when we get to that point. And that, as simply as could be said, could have been that the developer or declarant held a meeting with the residents, could have been 3 or 4 months ago, and say, here's the things that are going to happen, and in April, we're going to have it, or May, we're going to have a turnover meeting, all right? We would have then been prepared for something like that. To the best of our knowledge, and why we really are looking for the city for assistance, over the last 3 years, we don't think there's been any public meeting with the HOA residents. There's been no board of directors on the association, all right? And what we're looking for is that we think that the city, as part of the process, because we don't consider it completed until this part is done, that the city has a series of questions that they're asking of the declarant developer, that he makes sure that that's been discussed with the residents, the homeowners association of the Lakes of Green. And this is simply of, all residents have the declaration, rules, guidelines, and procedures. Most important in particular for our development, the declarant or developer has notified in writing that all 3 phases, phase 1, 2, and 3, are all one big subdivision, and all the common elements that are in that subdivision are going to be the responsibility of every single resident of the subdevelopment. Phase 1 was done 9, 10 years ago, all right? I don't think any of those people got the information, and I don't think any of those people realize that they're totally responsible for anything that's happened in phase 2 and phase 3, okay? There's also a street, Ontario. I don't think any of those people know that even the Lakes of Green are there, except they got a sign in the front, all right? Nobody's looking at that. Has each resident been given a list of all the common area and expenses, all right, for each area? Then one of the big ones is ponds, all right? Each resident needs to get an accounting. And again, this is stuff that I think is in one meeting, and the city could require this. We need the declarant developer to give us an accounting of, he's had control, he still has control of what's going on in the development. And we need an accounting of that. What does he spend his money on? All right, well, our money, all right? All the dues been paid, or any dues that are outstanding? And what are the areas that he spent that money on? My prior HOA and condo experience says that the declarant developer will keep the annual fees low to make sure they attract people to come in and live in the development. All right? We're looking for...
You're a little over your 3 minutes. If you could kind of wrap your comments up, I'd appreciate it.
All right, okay, I'll wrap it up. The residents are not in control. The residents don't have any power. The city has the power. And what I'm asking the city to do is just a short list of things that the city will require to make sure the residents are starting off on an even keel, level keel, so that they can then run their HOA as they want to run it in accordance with, city rules and regulations. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Talinda. The next person signed in this evening is Mr. Witzman.
Glenn Witzman, 3431 Greensburg Road, North Canton, 44720. I'm here tonight to talk about the Green Historical Society's 3rd grade program. So I'm here to invite City Council and the Mayor to come out to Jackson Township, to a one-room schoolhouse, and see the program in action. Jackson Historical Society has let us use their one-room schoolhouse again this year so we can keep the project going. And with the volunteers in the Green Historical Society, we dress up in period clothes, and we teach our 3rd grade classes what it was like to live in 1885. And in the 11 days that we do this, we have 170 volunteer hours that we volunteered to do this. It's one of our bigger projects. And we teach them like they did back in 1885. We do reading, and that's through the McGuffey Readers. We do writing. We use feather quill and ink, and that's one of the biggest things. They like that. It's a little messy, but they like it. And in arithmetic, we have games that they play, and we also have Roman numerals that we go over because that's what they used on their clocks back then. At recess, they play games that they played back in 1885, like jacks and marbles and hopscotch and roll the hoop around in the yard. They like that. And we also tell them when the history part comes that their parents had to pay for them to go to school, so that's why they were good. And when they weren't farming in the summer and in the winter, there were more kids in school. And the reason why we tell them that their parents had to pay is because in Cincinnati in 1885, the trades, like the carpenters and the blacksmith, only made a little less than 2.5 cents an hour on a 60-hour week, to show them that the money, you know, you think, oh, your parents had to pay 50 cents for you to go to school. It's like, oh, big deal. But when you only made 2.5 cents an hour, it was a big deal. We explained to them that there were no paper bags, usually, in the rural areas. There were no plastic. They didn't have napkins like we had. They had to use pieces of cloth. And we also tell them there were no cell phones, no computers, no airplanes, no cars. And they didn't have indoor plumbing or electricity. And we go through a lot of other stuff with them. It's about a 4.5-hour program. We like to have you come and look at it. It starts around 9 o'clock. You have a list of when the times are and when the dates. I advise you not to come at noon because they have lunch and recess, and you can't observe anything but lunch and recess. And so we ask that you take a half hour of your time and get on your horse, ride to Jackson, and go back to the 1800s with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Witzman. The next person we have signed in is Pat Karleski.
Pat Karleski, 3878 Greenfield Road, Uniontown, 44685. I was listening to NPR and WKSU yesterday morning and heard Mr. Pickett in a discussion of roundabouts. He was well-spoken, informative, and balanced in his presentation. This reflects highly on Mr. Pickett and our city. Thank you, Mr. Pickett.
Thank you.
However, I still don't like roundabouts.
Haven't convinced you yet.
New topic. I enjoyed the Parks and Recreation Planet Green presentation on chimney swifts, a threatened species, on April 10th. Chimney swifts are unique in that they cannot perch horizontally, only vertically by wedging their feet into crevices in chimneys or walls. The next presentation is July 17th, attracting beneficial insects to the home garden habitat. I urge anyone interested in nature gardening or science to attend. School will be out, so bring the kids. I'm sure many of them, especially 10-year-old boys, are interested in bugs, if only for the ick factor. The location hasn't been determined yet. I am sure they will need to dig up some good dirt, considering the subject, and that it is election time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Karleski. The next person we have signed in this evening is John Drum.
Hello, my name is John Drum, 2781 Tiff Street, Cuyahoga Falls. I'm a non-resident. I was driving in Green a couple weeks ago and I seen one of the signs for a law director position. I had a run-in with one of your people that are running for the law director, and I got 3 tickets on my property for not having a license. She found me guilty of that violation. I showed her the Ohio Revised Code where a military vehicle is called an M151. And in the Ohio Revised Code, it says that I am allowed to have and keep my license plate and my registration in the vehicle, not on the vehicle. And I gave this to her as she was a magistrate in the city's mayor's court. And I explained that to her. I said, I have the registration because on 6/13 is when I got my registration renewed for my antique plate, and they gave me the ticket on the 21st. And I explained to her, how can you give me a ticket and find me guilty when I already had my registration filled out 7 days before? She did not like my attitude. Lady Justice is supposed to be blind, and she was not blind. She didn't like my attitude. She pulled out all 3 tickets and says, you're guilty on all 3. Go away. If you need a law director, Lisa Dean is not the law director that you need. She was in Cuyahoga Falls as a magistrate, and she's got her law license, but to do this to a resident, the city of Green does not need a person like that telling all of you how to direct the law in a city that's growing like Green is. And I just wanted to let you know that she came all the way down here to become a law director, and she don't even know how to abide by the rules. And I also have a complaint that I am sending to the Supreme Court Disciplinary Committee because she violated my rules. The Ohio Revised Code said I have rules to follow. She violated 3 of these. You do not need her as the law director in this city. And as being a non-resident, I don't want another city to get stuck with her. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Drum. The next person we have signed in to speak this evening is Mr. Steve Barry.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I come before you tonight not only as the Sheriff of Summit County, but a very proud resident of the city of Greene. Yesterday, as most of you know, I always feel funny up here because my back's to half the people. We had a situation in a call that none of us ever want to have. Sorry for the back. We had a 2-year-old, if anyone doesn't know, we had a 2-year-old toddler missing. Anytime you have a toddler missing, it is a terrible, terrible thing. When that toddler is missing in the middle of the night, under darkness, and has special needs, and has non-verbalization skills, it is a very, very critical situation, to say the least. It is something we never want to have to deal with. I come here very proud today, like I said, not only as the sheriff, but as a City of Greene resident, because we have had a wonderful relationship, the sheriff's office with the City of Greene, from the time I first took a badge in 1979 as a special deputy sheriff with this department. I want to thank everyone, the mayor's office, the city council, all the officials. We have had an outstanding relationship, and I want to see that continue. But I got to tell you, when I turned on to Chrisman Road and I saw what I saw, it was unbelievable. We had almost 200 volunteers with 20 agencies represented, with a lot of those people working for this man, who I've got to thank independently. Chief Jeff and I have a great relationship. We've known each other for years. And when you see City of Greene fireman after fireman after fireman saying, what can I do, what can I do, it is a heck of a great feeling. This came out wonderfully, as most of you know. This is the kind of outcomes we love, and we thank the good Lord above for. The 2-year-old was fine, and we had resources in the air. We had resources ready to go in the water. We had ATVs, we had mounted, we had K-9s, and we are very proud to serve this city. We want to continue to do so. But I'm here to say thank you, Mayor, thank you, Council, and thank you, all the officials. And I want to thank the citizens who got a hold of us and said, whatever you need, we'll be there. It's just due to the situation and the circumstances, we have to do certain things in certain time periods, as the chief knows very well as well. I thank you all, and I want to continue the relationship we have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sheriff Barry. We appreciate that. Good news is always welcome news here, and we're equally as thankful for the services that you and the fire department provide here, and all the people willing to help out. And it's always good when there's a good income. Things like that are terribly scary. So that's everyone that signed in. Is there anyone else here that signed in or not signed in who'd like to speak to council? Yeah, I was going to do that. The next item we have is the public report. And since Mr. Brown was busy this evening during our committee meetings, if he wouldn't mind coming up now and giving us our monthly sheriff's report, we'd appreciate that.
Yeah, due to a call, I was running late. For the March stats, we were dispatched to 2,070 calls, which is 66 per day we averaged. They made 222 traffic stops, issued 50 citations, 170 warnings, and they made 2 OVI arrests. Handled 89 traffic accidents with 62 which were non-injury, 17 injuries, and 10 hit skips reported. We had a total of 68 total arrests, responded to 9 domestic violence calls with 7 arrests being made, 3 burglaries and V&Es with 1 arrest being made, 27 theft reports taken, misdemeanors with 8 arrests so far. 2 sex offenses have been reported and 2 arrests have been made. and we had 13 drug arrests. And so far, our overdoses are still going down. We responded to 2 in the month of March, and 0 fatals. Any questions?
Thank you, Deputy. Appreciate it. That takes us to our next item on the agenda here. We have no public hearings scheduled, so we will move to the reading of correspondence.
Email from Mark and Karen Reinhardt regarding station number 4. An email from Lois Miller regarding this recycle center. An email from Susan Collinsberger regarding fire station number 4 in Ward 3. Civil Service Commission March 13th minutes. An email from John Drum regarding speaking at the council meeting. And the April 18th, 2019 Planning and Zoning Commission agenda, and that's it.
Thank you. The next item is the reading of new legislation.
First reading, Resolution 2019 R35, a resolution authorizing the mayor to apply for Summit County Trail and Greenway Community Grant Funds program by the Ohio and Erie Canalway Coalition for the existing Shriver Road multi-use trail upgrade project and declaring an emergency.
This will be referred to the Planning and Economic Development Committee.
First reading ordinance 2019-10, an ordinance approving the editing and inclusion of certain ordinances and resolutions as parts of the various component codes of the codified ordinances, providing for the adoption and publication of new matter in the updated and revised codified ordinances, repealing ordinances and resolutions in conflict therewith, and declaring an emergency.
This will be referred to the Rules and Personnel Committee. The next item is the report of council committees. The first committee to report this evening is the Finance Committee, chaired this evening by Mr. Humphrey.
Thank you, Mr. President. Finance did meet this evening. Myself, Mr. Yeargin, Mrs. Babbitt were present. We first received the income tax collection report for the first quarter 2019. When we compare the first quarter of 2019 versus the first quarter of 2018, we're running about 0.44% behind, so it's essentially flat income tax collections, which is certainly not a negative trend at this point. We talked to our finance director about that, received some additional information, and of course, we'll continue to follow this throughout the year. We also did thank our income tax staff. They probably received more people on Monday than they had ever received before. They're working very hard at tax time, and we do appreciate their efforts. All tax professionals know the relief that happens at the end of tax time, but it's probably mostly brought on by exhaustion from all the hard work, so we appreciate our income tax collection staff. We did have several items of legislative business. The first was a third reading of 2019-06, an ordinance creating a budget stabilization fund and declaring an emergency. We did receive a report from our law director. A question was raised last time as to whether or not I had a conflict to be able to vote on this legislation, and so I asked the law director for an opinion on that. He did give us his opinion this evening and indicated that there was no conflict and that I would be able to vote on this legislation. I did indicate during the Finance Committee that I have requested the law director to prepare legislation that any time in the future that money is moved from one financial institution to another, that council be affirmatively notified so that we are able to discern at that point in time whether any conflict exists. And then I asked Mr. Schmidt to review a 20-year-old policy that the city has regarding an investment policy statement that was sent out by our clerk when these issues came to the front, and we determined that it would be a good time to review the investment policy statement. And so I've asked our Director of Finance to take a look at that to see if there are any modernizations that need to take place to that investment policy statement, and I'll ask that he report back at an appropriate time to the Finance Committee during one of our committee meetings. We had a good debate on 2019-06. This is legislation that was put forward by Mr. Dyer, and at this time, I'll allow him to make the motions on it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Spate made a couple of suggestions of changes he'd like to make. And, you know, given the spirit of cooperation we've showed on the next piece of legislation, I would like to extend the cooperative hand on this piece of legislation to try to make sure that it can be all of our names on top of it rather than just a couple. So I would ask that we take time on this, just as we've had just as we did on the next piece of legislation.
Yeah, and I'll object to time. I think, given the debate that we had, I don't think that this is a fund that is necessary. It's actually creating a smaller fund than the 6-month reserve that we already have. We already have the flexibility to be able to use the money from the general fund for anything that the stabilization fund would have. The stabilization fund has an additional weakness that you have to take the money and put it back into the general fund every year. We did talk about this at the debate, during the debate, and I can see, because I see no purpose to the legislation, we already have a 6-month reserve that our city has had the good sense and fiscal discipline to maintain, and so I really look at this as a piece of unnecessary legislation, and so for that reason, I will just ask if anyone wants to make a motion to adopt, they may at this time. Hearing no motion, then the piece of legislation fails for want of a motion. The next piece of legislation we
Wait a
had in
minute.
committee this evening.
Then I'll move to adopt, I guess.
Second.
Okay. I have a motion and a second to adopt 2019-06.
Mr. President, I need to get a ruling on the law director. If there's no motion on a third reading, does the legislation go away?
Well, we have a motion and a second.
I understand. I'm just curious about that procedure.
Let me see if I can double check on that. Seems to me like it would. And Molly, I'll take any help you have as well.
Maybe this is something we could get via email tomorrow.
We have a motion and a second. Just get back to us, that's fine. But I'm not certain that's the way the procedure works, but that's fine. Let's move ahead with the vote.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mr. President,
Wait
sorry,
a
is
minute.
there an option for comments?
Yeah, sure, there's always an option. Mr. Spade.
All right, thank you, Mr. Young. You know, I like what Mr. Dyer's trying to do with this. Unfortunately, I think a little more time, and we could make some tweaks to it to make it better. Like I said, my idea behind why I like the concept is because I think it puts just an extra level of safety on our finances. It sets off an alarm if we get too low. I understand it's not perfect, but I'm looking that if we had some additional time to make corrections to it, we could make it something I think is palatable for everybody. Ultimately, I think it's what we do. It's just putting it on paper. It's adding a safeguard, and like I said, it's setting off an alarm if the finances get to a point to where that alarm should be sound. However, without those changes, and if we're forced to vote on it tonight, I will be voting no. But I like what Mr. Dyer's doing with it. I think he's showing some fiscal responsibility, which people have accused him of the other throughout the time. And this is one thing where he's stepping up saying this is what we should do. And I think that should be recognized. But like I said, if we can't make the changes and we can't get the time and I'm forced to vote tonight, then I won't support it.
Mr. President, if I may.
Mr. Dyer.
You know, in every other community, I can't imagine another community in America where this goes down to defeat. I mean, it's amazing. This does not lower our reserve account. It does not lower our reserve account. We will still have 6 months in reserve. It'll just say that 20% of that reserve amount can only be spent to maintain our level of safety services during an economic downturn. That's all it says. You know, and again, at the end of every year, We have to move the money from the reserve, from the rainy day fund back into the general fund and then back into the rainy day fund. You write that legislation once, and then every year out, it's a matter of changing the year and changing the amount. That's it. Guys, this is nothing complicated. It really isn't. The legislation restricts the use of this set-aside and ties it to loss in revenue. So, for example, if FedEx and Diebold decide to leave tomorrow or something, and our revenue goes down more than 10%, this gives us a cushion to guarantee the same level of safety services that we've had, that we enjoy, that we talked about tonight, that we talked about, you know, being such a gem in this community. We're able to keep that for at least a couple of years to figure out how we're going to cope with the lost revenue or bring in more business or something like that to offset that loss. There is nothing in the current reserve fund that requires us to do any of that. Nothing. In fact, over the last 14 months, we have spent it on everything from golf courses to engineering to, you know, a whole bunch of other stuff. About $5.3 million has been moved from the general fund into other funds to pay for other stuff. This is just common sense. It's actually a very conservative approach to finance, to restrict what government can do with your money. After all, it is your money. The value added is the peace of mind for residents to know that if we do have a downturn and a tick down in our revenue stream, we'll have a couple of years to address those issues without the resulting loss of safety or other essential services in the city. A vote for this is a vote to guarantee no cops or firefighters will be laid off in a downturn. And we've been spending a lot of time lately talking about how great our police and fire services are, and this is an opportunity to put our money where our mouth is. Again, this is just, if you took this legislation and gave it to another city, they would pass it unanimously. And I fear that politics has creeped into this. I know my colleague to the left likes to bring up politics a lot as affecting people's decisions. But I can't look at this and not think that politics is playing a role in this decision. This is just it's just a no-brainer. You're telling government what they can do with your money. It's that simple. So with that, I would call the question.
Clerk, please call the roll.
Well, Mr. President, I'm going to object to the calling of the question because I think our rules say that you cannot speak in the debate and then immediately call the question, because essentially what you do when you do that is you give your point of view and then you don't allow anyone else to give an opposing point of view. And I'd like an opportunity to speak to those things that were just said.
Mr. Humphrey, you gave the opposing point of view before I spoke.
He didn't call the question.
I'd like
to be
just a
fair
moment.
there, I think Mr. Humphrey makes a valid point that you were afforded the opportunity to speak, and in an effort to muffle everyone else, you use a tactic to basically shut the discussion down.
It's nothing different than what Mr. Humphrey did 2 weeks ago when he was talking about the Walter Haverfield thing. He called the question right after he spoke. It's no different.
Well, I've got something to say. Maybe that'll help. I think it's an unneeded piece of legislation, and passing this piece of legislation would be undoing what's already been good work. Is there anyone else who would like to speak to this now?
I would just like to say...
Mr. Shaughnessy?
Oh, yes.
Go ahead.
Thank you,
You're welcome
Mr.
to
President.
speak.
Thank you. I would just like to say, the way I view this legislation, I think it's good, common sense legislation, but how I view it very similarly to council's legislation where we just set aside $3 million for a fire station number 4. To me, that's a promise to the people. We're setting aside that money for a purpose. And it's tough to break a promise like that, even though it's been pointed out that council setting aside money can easily break a promise. Well, it's not that easy, I'll tell you. To say one thing to the constituents and then do another, that's a tough road to hoe. But what I want to say here is this would be a promise from council to the people that we're going to set aside money for a specific purpose, and that's to retain our essential services, safety services in particular, so that there's no layoffs when there's a downturn. There's no downside to this legislation. We could stop it in a year. It has to be renewed, and it has to take an act of council to renew it. And if at that time we think, oh, we don't need this legislation, or we don't want this legislation, we don't feel that we need to know that our safety services are going to be there for us in a downturn, that this fund could buy us time to replace a big employer or source of revenue. If we feel we don't need that, we can change it. But right now, I think it's great legislation. I think it should be passed. Thank you.
Mr. President,
Mr. Humphrey.
you know, Mr. Dyer makes the implication that my decision is political. I'm not being political here. If I thought that there was a need for this legislation and I thought it was a good idea for the community, I'd vote for it. But here's what we're being told, and the community can decide whether or not I'm being political or someone else is being political. Here's what we're being told. Our current 6-month reserve is like a water bottle. It's like this water bottle here in front of me. And it's like Mr. Dyer says, well, okay, that's a water bottle. I want to call that water coffee, and I want to put it in a smaller container. That's what Mr. Dyer's legislation for the stabilization fund is. He's taking.
Mischaracterization,
Would
Mr.
you
Humphrey.
please,
Will you please
Mr.
stop
Dyer.
mischaracterizing
Please
the
let me
legislation?
speak.
Mr. Dyer, please
Gosh.
afford other people the same respect that you were given.
I didn't interrupt you, and I'd appreciate the opportunity to speak. What we have is a 6-month operating reserve. It is being sold as if we can't use the 6-month operating reserve on safety services. We can use that 6-month reserve on safety services, and that 6-month reserve is bigger, much bigger, than the stabilization fund. And we can use it not only for safety services, but for any essential services that we need. So essentially what we're being told is this coffee we're now going to call water, and we're going to act like it's a new product. It's not a new product. We have a 6-month reserve as a city, and we don't need an additional piece of legislation that essentially does the same thing in a smaller way and then call it different. I don't call that progress. I call that doing something so that we can say we've done it, but it really doesn't accomplish anything. And for that reason, that's why I'm voting against this legislation.
And that is a complete mischaracterization of it, but let's just go to the vote.
Actually, real quick, Mr. President, I'm just going to clarify something. Sorry. You know what, I'm going to go out on a limb, and I am going to support this. Under the wild chance that it does pass, I would bring up amendments after the fact, because I think you're onto something with this. I don't like the fact that we have the option to get rid of it. I think if we pass something like this, it needs to be solid, but if we do get it passed, I'll bring up an amendment to make it a permanent, reoccurring thing.
Okay, we have a.
Mr. President.
Oh, Ms. Babbitt.
Sorry.
That's fine.
Since we are going to vote on this, I just think it's important for me to say that during committee, I stated what my issues were with this legislation and why I feel that we can trust our elected officials to properly use the 6-month reserve. The only reason I'm speaking now is because any opposition to this legislation was characterized as political. I have no political interest in this legislation. For the reasons I stated in committee, I feel it is unnecessary.
Okay, we have a motion and a second on 2019-06. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mr. Dyer.
Yes.
Mr. Humphrey.
No.
Mr. Shaughnessy.
Yes.
Mr. Spate.
Yes.
Mr. Yergin.
No.
Mr. Young.
No?
Mrs. Babbitt. Oh, yeah. Mrs. Babbitt, sorry.
No.
I already had her in this, so. Ordinance 2019-09 failed 4-3.
Okay, the next piece of legislation we had in committee this evening was a third reading of 2019-07 as amended. This is an ordinance establishing the City of Green Pipeline Settlement Fund Advisory Committee to inform City Council about ways to most effectively and efficiently spend pipeline settlement funds remaining in the Pipeline Settlement Fund and declaring an emergency. There are some additional amendments that I anticipate will be made on this piece of legislation, and the committee request time.
Will be granted.
We had a second reading of 2019 R34 as amended. This is a resolution modifying appropriations within certain funds in order to provide sufficient funding and declaring an emergency. We did receive a report from Mr. Schmidt on the various items located in amended Exhibit A, and the committee requests time on this piece of legislation.
Time will be granted.
We had no items of old or new business, and we adjourned at 6:07.
Thank you, Mr. Humphrey. The next committee to report is Environment and Parks, chaired this evening by Mr. Spate.
Thank you, Mr. President. All members were present. We didn't have anything, so we didn't meet.
Very good. The next committee to report is Public Safety, chaired this evening by Mrs. Babbitt.
Thank you, Mr. President. All members were present. We did meet to receive the report, the March 2019 Green Fire Department Activity Report from Chief Funai. And then during the public report, we received the Summit County Sheriff's March 2019 Activity Report. And also during committee, we received the Summit County Sheriff's Office 2018 Annual Report from Lieutenant Sanchez. And when he came up to speak, he was joined by Chief Funai, and they kindly explained to us the methods taken by the Summit County Sheriff's Department and the Green Fire Department to address the missing child situation, which Sheriff Barry talked about earlier in our meeting. And just one last time, we want to express our gratitude to the Summit County Sheriff's Department and the Green Fire Department for their excellent handling of that situation, as well as their excellent communication of the situation and its resolution to our community. There was no other business before our committee, and we were adjourned at 6:25.
Thank you, Mrs. Babbitt. Next committee to report is Planning, Community, and Economic Development, chaired this evening by Mr. Yerrigan.
Thank you, Mr. President. Myself, Mr. Spate, and Mr. Young were present for a committee. We did have several items of legislation before us. One was 2019-04, an ordinance establishing a public notification requirement prior to City Council action authorizing city funds or authorizing the application for grants or other funding methods to be used for the design or construction of the master trail plan or similar long-range city development planning or portions thereof, and declaring an emergency. This is under more of a long-term investigation and research, and in light of that, I'll be asking for time.
Time will be granted.
On second reading, we have 2019 R30, a resolution accepting the Planning and Zoning Commission's approval of the Rain Tree Estates Phase 1 and 2 replat number 2 and declaring an emergency. Again, this is 2019 R30. This was discussed in committee. This also previously was passed by the Planning and Zoning Commission in March without objection. It essentially is a group of residents in Rain Tree Estates who've gotten together and purchased some property behind their homes and come to an agreement to divide it up and add acreage to each house. There were no members of the surrounding community object either at the Planning and Zoning Commission or at tonight's meeting, and therefore we determined that this was something that everyone was in agreement for and probably ripe for second reading passage. In light of that, I would make a motion on 2019 R31 to bypass the 3 reading rule.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to bypass the 3 reading rule on 2019 R30. Is there any discussion?
Yeah, just one point. I thought this was the one that we were going to have the change made for the notification
I'm
of
sorry.
council.
I'm sorry, I misread the number, 2019 R30.
30, okay. No, we're good
Thank
then.
you. We're still good. I think that's what I said.
Yes.
So I have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
And now I would move to adopt 2019 R30.
Second?
I have a motion and a second to adopt 2019 R30. Is there any discussion? Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mr. Yergin,
Yes.
Mr. Spate,
Yes.
Mr. Young,
Yes.
Mrs. Babbitt,
Yes.
Mr. Dyer,
Yes.
Mr. Humphrey,
Yes.
Mr. Shaughnessy.
Yes.
Resolution 2019 R30 adopted 7-0.
Also on the agenda this evening was 2019 R31, a resolution donating real estate owned by the City of Greene to Summit County Land Reutilization Corporation for the purpose of demolition of the structures on the property and accepting the land from the Summit County Land Reutilization Corporation to the City of Greene upon completion of the demolition and declaring an emergency. This was also discussed in committee. This legislation would give the mayor authority to transfer real estate that has an old or abandoned house on it or other structure that requires demolition. Summit County Land Reutilization Corporation accepts those properties, demolishes the homes at no charge to the city, and then transfers the land without the nuisance back to the city. This would allow the mayor to take action and avoid having to get council approval at every turn. Mr. Humphrey did bring up a good point that we'd like to see a provision inserted into the legislation that would notify council when that's going to happen. And also, Mr. Chris will look at tweaking the language to make clear that we're talking about approving a process and not a single transaction. In light of those changes, we'll be asking for time.
Time will be granted.
Also on the agenda tonight was 2019-09, an ordinance vacating a portion of Fortuna Drive and declaring an emergency. This was also on second reading, and we'll be asking for time.
Time will also be granted.
I, during the committee report, gave a brief summary of the action that occurred at the Planning and Zoning Commission on April 17th, and the committee was adjourned at 6:43.
Thank you, Mr. Yergin. The next committee to report this evening is Rules and Personnel, chaired by myself. We had no items of business, so we did not meet. The next committee to report is Transportation, Connectivity, and Stormwater, chaired this evening by Mr. Shaughnessy.
Thank you, Mr. President. Myself, Mr. Young, Mr. Yergin were present. We had no items to discuss, and we too adjourned at 6:43.
Thank you, Mr. Shaughnessy. The next committee to report this evening is Intergovernmental and Utilities, chaired this evening by Mr. Dyer.
Thank you, Mr. President. Myself, Mr. Shaughnessy, Mr. Spate were here. We didn't have anything to talk about, so we didn't meet.
And thank you, Mr. Dyer. And the last committee to report is the Charter Amendment Implementation Committee, chaired this evening by Mr. Yergin.
Thank you, Mr. President. Myself, Ms. Babbitt, and Mr. Shaughnessy were present. We had no items of legislation before us or old or new business, and we did not meet. But I would remind residents and council that tomorrow evening, the Charter Review Commission will be reconvening at 7 p.m. in council chambers for those who are interested.
Thank you, Mr. Yergin. That takes us to the mayor's report.
Thank you, Mr. President. A few things. I'm going to start with the recycling center. There have been some residents that asked about having additional hours of the recycle center because of the storm damage 9 days ago. And so, Valerie, why don't you update the community on the recycle center?
Sure. We did go ahead and open our recycle center to the summer hours, and the new summer hours, just to announce, and that started this past week, today, in fact. The Tuesday, Thursday is 12 to 6, and Saturday 9 to 5. And I know we've been experimenting with with hours the last couple months, and even last summer. We actually been tracking when we have the most traffic. So we've adjusted our hours to actually push more into the evening, because that's when it seems like people come later in the day. Both, particularly on Tuesday and Thursday, and on Saturday, we do still have a lot of traffic even into the evening. So our winter hours were 8 to 2 on Saturday, now they're 9 to 5. So that'll give a lot more time for people to be able to bring things out. Just so you're all aware, that is, most of our labor for that recycle center is paid through a grant. So we like to try to stay within our grant amount. So the last thing we want to do is have someone out there monitoring the site when no one's coming. So we're trying to match the hours to when most of the people do come to the recycling center. I know it's not everyone's choice, but we're trying to serve the majority. Thank you.
And if you have any other comments about the hours, feel free to update Valerie, and we'll do what we can to make sure it's an asset for our community. A few events I'd like to talk about. I guess 2 weeks ago, on April 10th, Wednesday, I made opening remarks at the Akron General Health and Wellness Center for our Healthy Green 8-week health challenge program. This is the third time we've run the program, inviting green residents to come and get healthy for 8 weeks. Next day, Thursday, April 11th, we had our Blessings in a Backpack packing. I just want to make a note for those who would like to join us. The next one will be on Thursday, May 2nd at 9 a.m. And then on Monday, April 15th, I visited Aerial Corp with our Economic Development Coordinator to see their operations. Very impressive work that they do here in our city. And then Tuesday, April 16th, at Green Central Park, we initiated our Little Free Library. This is a dedicated free library at Central Park, and I want to thank the following: Green Schools Foundation and Green Intermediate School librarian Ren Nicodemo for their work on this project. Also, Green Branch librarian Sherry Swisher, who will keep the books flowing into the free library. Also at the event were 15 sixth graders from Green Intermediate Schools who all selected a book that was special to them, and they added those to fill the library. Last Thursday, April 18th, we had our Building Bridges, which was entitled Building Community Through Giving, and we had speakers from the local charities, including Jennifer Durr from Blessings in a Backpack program, Pat Angeletti from Learning Buddies in Green Schools, Pat Stiles and J.T. Warmus from Green Good Neighbors, and Carol Babb from the Little Sib Shop. And just last Saturday, April 20th, we had our Easter egg hunt in Central Park. It was a rainy morning, but we had over 120 kids who showed up and hunted for the Easter eggs. They were all gone in 10 minutes, all 4,000 of them. I want to thank Girl Scout Troop 90109 that stuffed all 4,000 eggs with chocolate bars for the children. And also we had 10 volunteers from Green High School Key Club, and also volunteers Autumn Groen and Jack Abate, who helped hide the eggs and hand out treats. Upcoming events this Thursday will be a program called Hidden in Plain Sight. That program will be at 6 p.m. at the City of Green Central Park Community Hall. A light dinner will be served. This will be an interactive exhibit presented by Bath and Copley Township Police Departments that is designated to resemble a teenager's bedroom. The exhibit contains more than 150 seemingly harmless items that may be indicative of dangerous or risky behaviors, including substance abuse, violence, eating disorders, juvenile crime, unsafe technology use, or risky games and challenges. And then coming this Saturday, April 27th, is Bring Your Bike to the Park event. This is from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m., and they provide safety checkups for your bicycle if you'd like to bring your bicycle over to that event. Saturday is also National Drug Take-Back Day, and that event will be from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. And if you have any unused drugs in your home that you no longer need or no longer prescribed for, please take them to Fire Station number 2 to have them properly disposed of. One of the key things with drug abuse sometimes is making sure that the drugs don't get into the wrong hands, and so if you dispose of them, we will eliminate that possibility. 2 more events. One, Arbor Day will be celebrated on May 3rd. We will also be celebrating the opening of Green's first dog park at Ayers Park, and that event will be at 1 p.m. And lastly, on Sunday, May 5th, and actually on Saturday, May 4th, we will be doing Crisis Awareness Sunday. Times are posted on our website. At this event, all the clergy at the local churches will be talking about drug abuse and mental health issues in their sermons to further educate our community about what's happening in those areas. So, Mr. President, thank you for the time.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That brings us to unfinished business. Mrs. Babbitt had something she wanted to bring up, so Mrs.
I
Babbitt.
do. I, in my haste during the Public Safety Committee meeting, I forgot to mention that Pat Karleski, a resident, spoke during our Public Safety meeting, committee meeting, and she told us about a program run by the Summit County Prosecutor's Office called Take Me Home, which I think is worth repeating during this meeting so that anyone watching it can learn about this program as well. This is a program through the Summit County Prosecutor where you can register any individual who might have verbal problems or memory problems with the Take Me Home program. Their picture goes into a database, and then if that individual ever is has become lost or is missing, the people helping them can access the Take Me Home database, the Summit County prosecutors, and help get that person who might be lost reunited and with their family or their caretaker, and help that person get back to where they need to be. So it's called the Take Me Home problem. Sorry, I'm very tired. The Take Me Home program run by the Summit County Prosecutor's Office. Thank you, Pat, for letting us know about that.
Okay, is there any other business?
Yes, Mr. President, real quick, I'd just like to bring to the attention of the community that Green Schools Foundation has a Run for Education Saturday, May 4th. Starts at 8:30 with a 1-mile run, 9 o'clock for a 5K, and that's at the Memorial Stadium. More information is on the Green Schools Foundation website.
Thank you, Mr. Spate. Last call, anyone else? Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
We're adjourned.